We have arrived over here at the old city walls of Akko over here, and here we see a very interesting and an important historic site. We have these old city walls over here. These were originally built by the Crusaders, right, in the 1200s, and we'll speak about them a bit, right? But they were reinforced by in the 1700s when the city was rebuilt by the Turks, particularly by somebody named Dar al-Omer, El-Jazar. You don't really care. Right. What is important is that in 1799, this short little Frenchman, Napoleon Bonaparte, comes to conquer the entire world. Napoleon Bonaparte comes to Eretz Yisrael, he comes to Yaffo, conquers Yaffo, he goes to Haifa, he conquers Haifa, and then he comes up to the city of Akko and he lays siege around the city. The city obviously is terrified. Oh no, what are we going to do? Napoleon's wiping out everybody. How are we going to make it through? El-Jazar has a good thing going for him. He has a nice Jewish advisor named Chaim Farchi. Chaim Farchi, a super wealthy person, an advisor, very politically astute, goes over to El-Jazar and he says to him, what we can do is like this. Why don't we reinforce, while Napoleon is laying siege on our wall, let's build a second wall within the first wall. Sure enough, that's what the Jews do. After about a month's siege over here outside the city walls, Napoleon comes and finally smashes through the city walls, and lo and behold, he gets struck by the next wall. The soldiers are sitting there. He was not expecting it. They shoot down and they fire at Napoleon's army, and Napoleon's army is wiped out. Right? Napoleon takes heavy losses, and then he decides, this is just too much already. He hears that things are not going good in Europe. He heads back to Haifa. He takes his soldiers that are stuck in the hospital over there, brings them back to the shoreline, gets ready to boat them up, and then he lines them all up, and he kills his own soldiers with a bayonet over there. Why should he take back extra luggage? I guess they had limited amount of space that they were allowed to take. Napoleon goes back, he loses the Battle of Waterloo, and he dies. Meaning, if not for the city of Akko, we might be speaking French today. Right? So this is really the last stop on Napoleon's world conquest ends over here in the city of Akko. Hasidim have a little different version of the story. They suggest the reason why the city of Akko was saved is because at that time in the city, locked into the city, was none other than a very big tzaddik named Rabbi Nachman Meuman. Nachman of Breslov was here at the city, and it was in his zechus that the city of Akko was saved. So this is the old city walls. We're going to go inside and check out some of the fantastic sites in the old city. Here we are in the old city of Akko. Now, Akko is a unique city. It's actually doubly recognized by UNESCO. UNESCO is United Nations Society for Historical and Archaeological Sites all over the world, and Akko is actually doubly recognized. One of the reasons why Akko is recognized by UNESCO, as a World Heritage City, of which there's about 850 sites, is because you actually see two different civilizations living here at one time, at one place. What do I mean? Meaning we're going to talk a little bit more about the Crusaders, but in the year 1099, the Crusaders come to Eretz Yisrael, they wipe out the Jewish population over here, and they conquer the entire country, throw out the Muslims, and they establish their Crusader city over here. They were destroyed again. Salah ad-Din comes up in the year 1187, comes up from Egypt, with, of course, his loyal doctor, the Rambam, and they come to Eretz Yisrael, and the Crusaders throw the Crusaders out. The Crusaders come back again. They're kind of like strep throat. They just keep coming back again and again and again, and they conquer the city. And ultimately, they come to an agreement with Salah ad-Din, where the Crusaders will remain on the coastline of Eretz Yisrael, while the Muslims will stay to a large degree in the center of the country. That lasts for about 50 years or so. So there's a new group of Arabs that come. They're called the Mamelukes. Right? They're slaves from Egypt. They come up, they conquer the entire Eretz Yisrael. They wipe out the Crusaders. And what they do is they don't want the Crusaders to come back again, so they bury all of their cities. They knock them down till the bottom. And this entire city becomes buried. This is about in the late 1200s or so. It took about another 400, 500 years until the Turks returned to Eretz Yisrael in the 1700s, and they decide to rebuild the city. However, they rebuild the city on the remains of the former Crusader city that was below. So over here, what we have is two different civilizations. Down below, we have the Crusader cities. Up above here, where we're all walking, this is the Ottoman Turkish city. The Ottomans, to a large degree, weren't even familiar that there was an underground city. It wasn't until after the State of Israel in the 1950s that we excavate here and we discover the incredible halls and tunnels from the times of the Crusaders. Let's go inside and talk a little bit more about the Crusaders. You Mishpacha readers and website viewers today are lucky, because I don't generally come down here with my tourists. We're standing inside of the halls of where the Crusader was. Actually, this is the big courtyard. To the right of us, we have these huge halls where the Crusaders would eat, where they would dance, where they would party. There's where they would pray. And frankly, this place doesn't really interest me that much. Take a look behind me. You see these flags over here, lions and this and that. I want you to replace those flags, those glorious looking flags, with something called a swastika. Correct, a swastika. Would you be interested in me taking you to show you where the Nazis ate, where the Nazis drank? The Nazis, Yamach Shemam, would go ahead and pray. Not that they prayed. Right? The Crusaders, to a large degree, were like the Nazis. They were murderers. They were Reitzchen. They started off in Europe when they realized that this was the Dark Ages, the 1100s or so, and the Pope realized that there was way too many people having babies there in the Dark Ages, and what are we going to do with all of these kids? I have a good chap. We'll send them off to the Holy Land and have them liberate the holy Christian sites from the Muslims. As an added incentive, we'll let them kill, murder, massacre, pillage, burn every single Jewish city that they'd like along the way, and they'll be forgiven when they come to the Holy Land. And they did. They wiped out, the Crusaders wiped out, it's estimated, almost 30% of the Jewish population throughout Europe. They come over here and they take Eretz Yisrael and they conquer Eretz Yisrael. The Crusaders, to a large degree, were even worse in many ways than the Nazis. The Nazis had the benefit of machine guns, gas chambers. The Crusaders, it was by sword. Men, women, and children burning, killing, destroying. So frankly, it's not that interesting to me to show you where these people, these chayas, really lived, where they ate, where they celebrated. But this is where they were. This is the Crusaders. Every Shabbos, we remember the period of the Crusades. We have a tefillah, Av HaRachamim, that remembers the martyrs of the Crusades. Even more than that, the period of Sfiras HaOmer, when we're in mourning, which we're told in Yeshiva is from the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, and that is true. However, the minhagim that we have, not to get married, not to go ahead and listen to music, not to shave, the minhagei avelis all starts, the Aruch HaShulchan brings down, after the Crusades. It was such a dramatic, terrible thing that took place because the Crusaders always came in the spring period. So this is the area where the Crusaders were. These are their halls, these are their tunnels. Take a look around over here and think of the faces of the Reitzchim and the murderers that killed our people, and then think of the fact that Baruch Hashem, we're still here. We're back here. Klal Yisrael is here in Eretz Yisrael, and where are they?
And so we have arrived here at this huge fortress overlooking the city of Akko. This building was built by the Turks in the 1700s, and it was used as a fortress to keep the prisoners that they would capture and even execute here from throughout their empire. During World War I, the Turks had joined with the Germans and lost, and the British took over Eretz Yisrael. Under the British mandate, it continued to be used as a prison for the Jewish and Arab prisoners that they had arrested. This prison was known as the Alcatraz of the Middle East, and we can understand why from just looking at the conditions here. The walls are thick, impenetrable. A huge moat surrounded the prison, and it was built up against the sea. There was no way out. The conditions inside of the prison were terrible. There were 20 to 30 prisoners inside one cell. It was dark. It was bars on the windows. It was impossible to see sunlight. You would be allowed out for an hour a day. There was a latrine on the floor that they would use. They would have a wall that they would allow visitors every once in a while, but it was out in the beating sun. It was terrible, terrible conditions for the prisoners to be there. Who were the prisoners that were kept here, the Jewish prisoners? Well, after the British had taken over the land of Israel, there was, can you believe this, a difference of opinion amongst the Jewish residents of Israel in how they would liberate the country and establish a Jewish state over here. There was 3 underground armies that were formed, the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi. Some were more radical in their approach, attacking the British. Others decided to use means of diplomacy and were involved in illegally bringing refugees into the land of Israel. Prisoners were kept here together, and yet all of them shared one common dream. They dreamed of a day that they would be able to liberate this country and create a Jewish home for all Jews to come to.
And with that in mind, the members of the Irgun got together and they planned their escape. The most remarkable escapes to take place in the founding of the State of Israel.
So this is the prisoners' escape. They knew that they had to get out of here. And so they had planned in advance the Turkish bathhouse. They knew that was there on that side. They took a lottery. They figured they could get 3 jeeps into the old city. They dressed up like telephone repairmen, and they pretended like they were fixing wires. Meantime, they placed explosives on all of the walls. Right at the designated time, they set off explosives on the other side of the prison. The Haganah, the Eitzel soldiers, the Irgun soldiers that were staying remained over there. There were 41 soldiers that were chosen to escape, blew up the wall over there. They blew up this gate. They ran down there to the 4th window. They jumped down out of the window when it exploded, and they landed into the jeeps. The 3 jeeps took off, and they started leaving the city. While they were leaving the city, one of the jeeps made a wrong turn, and there was an off-duty police officers that heard them and opened up fire on them. A shootout went back and forth. Some of the prisoners were killed. Some of them were recaptured and brought back here to the prison. In the end, 27 soldiers escaped the prison that day. 3 of them that were brought back were hung here in the gallows and sentenced to death. When the prison breakout took place, this became the straw that broke the camel's back. This was world news all over. You have to realize, whenever it's Jews, it's news. And this was news. It was also, this prison was like Alcatraz. It was the most fortified prison in the Middle East. And the Jews had broken out. It set a spotlight on the people over here, where they saw that there were Jewish prisoners, Holocaust survivors, some of them being held behind chains and bars. The pressure mounted on the British till they realized that they couldn't take it anymore. They turned to the United Nations at that time. They said, figure it out. We're not going to do this anymore. The United Nations ultimately came back a few months later, actually, in November 29, 1947, with its historic vote that there will be a 2-state solution, a Jewish state and an Arab state. So this prison and the breakout from the prison is really the straw that broke the camel's back that led to ultimately the establishment of the State of Israel, in that the War of Independence began after that.
We're here at the final room. This is the gallows. This is where the prisoners that we spoke about were brought to be murdered by the British. There were 9 prisoners that were hung over here. Shlomo ben Yosef, Mordechai Schwartz, Dov Gruner, Mordechai Alkachi, Yechiel Dov Dresner, Eliezer Kashani, Yaakov Weiss, Avshalom Chaviv, and Meir Nacker. These prisoners were brought over here, usually taken out in the middle of the night so that they wouldn't create a ruckus. They would come over here. They would have a hood put over their head, and then they would be sentenced to death and killed. I remember hearing a story once. I was talking to Rabbi Beryl Wine, and he told me something very incredible. He remembered after World War II, the Panovich Rav came to Eretz Yisrael, and he had lost his entire family in Eretz Yisrael. And he came to America to try to raise money to rebuild life again. And he came to Chicago, and he comes to Chicago, and he gives them a shiur in his class. After the shiur, he tells them, Ich will doch sagen etwas, mein teure Kinder. I want to tell you something, my dear children. Today, in Eretz Yisrael, in Akko, in Yerushalayim, in the prison, there are sitting 10, 20, 30 soldiers, 40 soldiers that are sitting. They're being imprisoned by the British for fighting for Eretz Yisrael. Herr sich zu, mark my words, he said to them. Ich will doch sagen etwas. He said, if these 20 to 30 soldiers, they wird arois kommen and wird arois warfen the British from Eretz Yisrael. They're going to take the British and they're going to throw them out of Israel, and they wird ausbauen a jüdische Medina. They're going to build a Jewish state. Aber ich will doch sagen mehr from them. If I had 20, 30 Talmidim that had the Zelba Mesiras Nefesh, the same dedication, the Achrayis for Klal Yisrael, the sacrifice that these young boys do, we can ausbauen a Torah Medina in Eretz Yisrael. We could build a Torah state in Eretz Yisrael as well.
aber ich hab das nicht. I don't have these students. Learn up from these boys what it means to be Ibrigegeben for Klal Yisrael. This is, I think, the message here. We come here, we see these people that were Meiser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. They sang for us to be here today. This is the final message.